All right, we're recording. Well, it's nice to meet you. It's nice to
Nice
see
to
you.
meet you.
So I live in Alabama,
I live in Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. All right. Yeah, I usually get up really early, so I drank a little bit of coffee so I could stay up for this conversation.
I am the precise opposite.
Yeah, I was guessing that might be true. You chose the later of my window, so but that's fine. All right.
It's your
The
show. Where are we going?
yeah. Oh, is it my show? the well, The is there any is so we I guess the last thing I was talking about was kind of this. I was connecting the goal of eventually some kind of peace with um, an intermediate goal of trying to make sure everybody has food, for example, and before that can happen, it's like you have to solve this problem of being able to organize humans, and I would say as a part of that it would be sense making, but it seems like your your idea of sense making has something to do with collective sense making for like some large number of people. So that would be like kind of my first question is like, is when you talk about this cognitive outsourcing, like how many people need to how much awareness do you need, or are you looking for, or are you thinking about?
So, I mean, s- so human beings outsource their cognition, right? And society as a whole is functions kind of as a network of human beings, right? Um, my big worry right now is that I feel that that network is being hacked, right? And so, um, you know, culture progresses except when society breaks down, right? So, like there were the Dark Ages, where the level of technology and human flourishing went down in the Roman Empire. That was caused, I would argue, by um, a lack of cognitive outsourcing, a lack of educated people being able to share technology with each other, being able to rely on each other. Um, and, we live in a society where no one person can truly be a, jack of all trades. That's just impossible, right?
Right.
So if if we are going to function, we have to be able to reliably, and this is the problem, reliably outsource our cognition to other people, at least in certain ways. And we're seeing a rise in conspiracy theories, in social mistrust. Um, I believe because though there has been active undermining, because people have been capturing those mechanisms of sense making that our society has, where we all, especially education, but also the media, the pundits, the people who most of us aren't aware how much we outsource our cognition. Um, the problem is that unless we can secure that outsourcing, we're I think our society is going to completely break down, and I'm really worried about that. Um, I think the conspiracy theories are uh, just a symptom of that mistrust. And there are people who have started seriously talking about flat Earth and really crazy stuff, um, because I mean, there's just so much distrust.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as there could be a mistake, or it could actually be people keeping secrets, but you lose trust whenever you make mistakes or whenever you keep secrets. And then as soon as you stop trusting the authorities, you can make up any story you want. So
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that it's actually even worse than negligence or people keeping secrets. I think people have been actually actively taking over um, certain certain sense-making mechanisms for our society, like the New York Times. The New York Times has been captured. I don't think that you can actually trust the New York Times and as a what it used to be, which is the paper of record, right? Now it's simply not something I would trust at all, um, and that's a huge problem for our society.
right, they basically every every person and every organization, they have agendas, right? They have goals. And so there's a question of what should the goal be? I guess one question. It'd be nice to know what people's goals are, what their intentions are. And then another question that comes to mind is, um, it's like, how, like I feel like you and I were just like two, uh, two humans with limited influence, and then you know, figuring out how to start something where uh, there's a a technology or a platform or a community that is growing and earning trust over time. I guess that's the kind of the project that we're like thinking about.
Well, I would say most important is the protocol. I think technology um, can be a part of that, um, but actually having, when Wikipedia first started, I was an avid fan of Wikipedia, and I was I created some of the earliest pages on Wikipedia because I thought that it would grow to be this, in this repository of human knowledge. Um, and what quickly became real evident was that the people who have a particular interest in a particular um, in a particular topic will do whatever it takes to make sure that the Wikipedia article says the things that they believe are important, right? Um, and there are insufficient checks to make sure that there is the neutral point of view that Wikipedia really strived towards. Um, and I really thought towards the beginning, they were doing really well. But eventually, I mean, now, while I will look at a Wikipedia page because I expect to see, the controversies there, um, I have no trust in their actual synopsis. I have zero trust that the links that are given in the footnotes actually say the things that are attributed to them. Um, it's we've so every time we bump against a place where our outsourced cognition is corrupt, right? The information that we have received is corrupt. we become mistrustful, especially if we don't recognize, and I would say most people don't recognize what happens to them when there is that feeling of betrayal, when you know, I mean, I've seen so many videos of this, uh, especially regarding Donald Trump, where people say, "Well, you know, I went and checked, and I, I saw that it was a lie, right, regarding whatever it was, and that made me, you know, completely mistrust the media." This idea of red pilling, um, you know, I don't think it's the red pill. I think what's happening is people realize, hey, then my outsourced cognition, what I have relied other people to figure out for me, is not uh, is not something I can rely upon anymore. And a human being cannot function like, imagine if you truly were not going to rely on any other human being in terms of your cognition. What would happen? How would you exist? Um, you're going to check every footnote in every book. You're going to look at, you know, the news. You're going to distrust it until you check it, right? Um, it, it's impossible.
So this is where I don't know if I feel like we have a big difference here in that I've tried to practice agnosticism. Like it's a, and I know that some people just have a hard time even grappling with, you know, the idea that anyone could be agnostic about some things. But yeah, I usually approach things as if I don't, um, I don't know, and even I can't know, in the sense that like objectively know, but there's a type of knowing. I remember Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson talked about truth, and Jordan Peterson said there's something about the saying his aim was true. So there's a pragmatic truth, and so for me, I uh, I tend to I take that there's a pragmatic truth, and I take the concept that my beliefs shape who I am. They shape my mental health. They shape my behaviors, how I act in the world. And so then I pick and choose the things I believe based on like as an experiment, and where my experience in life and how I act is is the evidence in the experiment. So then, but there's a lot of things that you don't, or I would say, I don't want to say you, but there's a lot of things I don't have to pick a belief. I can just basically have no trust and be completely agnostic for a whole bunch of things. Um, and I'm sure I trust, there's some level of trust I have. Like I realize it every time I drive a car. There's, you know, I'm trusting these other people. But but when it comes to the news, like I got to where I stopped paying attention to the news, quote unquote news, whatever news is. And yeah, I've tried to just, I've been for years I've been trying to be very careful with my attention. But I do cognitive outsourcing with, I do some of it with my wife and even my children as well. So,
Well,
but I do think I think there's a practice of agnosticism and choosing your beliefs in this kind of pragmatic way that it works for me, or it seems to work. And I don't necessarily say everyone should do it, but it's something to consider.
well, no, I mean, I certainly think it's really important to have that agnosticism, especially regarding things where you yourself realize, okay, this is not an area of expertise that I have. This is not, you know, something I'm going to be able to develop a proper level of expertise, or even that I have an interest in developing that. The two caveats I would put there is, first and foremost, that which is most important are those things which you can least afford to be agnostic about, right? And for example, God forbid, if one of your kids gets sick, right, you're not going to go to medical school before your kid, you will find a doctor to try to figure out why your kid's sick, what can be done, right? And
Right.
that's
I may find multiple doctors and have second opinions, right?
that, which is also great.
Right.
Yes.
And also there are some things that a lot of doctors don't know. So like I've done some research about um, the cannabis plant and cancer, for example. I did this research over a decade ago. And so if I were to, encounter, cancer in my family, I would definitely look into cannabis again, and consider going to states where cannabis is legal. So, yeah, I understand what you're saying, especially if there's a surgery, like if you all of a sudden there's definitely like experts at anatomy and surgery and administering drugs to make sure that you can be safely uh, anesthetized. Is that the right word? Uh, and then brought back. Like I trust doctors there. I have less trust in some of the other areas like around cancer.
Well,
Uh,
that's part of the problem, though, right?
right. Right.
Because we do need to double check, because we don't trust our doctors as much as, you know, um, it would be nice to know when you go to a doctor that he has definitely, right? Or when you go to at least two doctors, to know that he has definitely done at least as much research as you have into all the relevant subjects, right? And there really is, I mean, this is the real problem, the biggest problem is that this is something that um, iterates, right? That doctor is also outsourcing his cognition, right?
Right.
He's reading studies, he's reading medical journals, he's uh, discussing with other doctors, with pharmacists, with representatives of the various companies, um, all the various things. So we have a social fabric, which, I mean, I really think part of the problem is people do not realize how dependent they are, right? When you seriously study epistemology, right? The study of how do I know things and what do I know, right? Um, when you do a serious study of epistemology, um, it quickly becomes very clear that the sort of rationality, especially that objectivists tend to talk about, but also even the rationalists, right? Um, that's that's just plain not practical, because you drink water from the tap and you are trusting, you know, uh, the thing that the people in Flint, Michigan should have been able to trust, but were not able to trust, right?
So actually, I have a Berkey, and I put water in a thing that has filters it has like two different sets of filters. So I'm not a trusting person, honestly.
Well, see, okay, no, see, that's both good and it's a problem, because in a society, and when you go, there are levels of trust in society, right? I am guessing you don't have a generator in your home right now, but that's becoming more and more of an issue, right? People in California and Texas have had to deal with not being able to get electricity, which was something we assumed, right? Um, and this is becoming more and more of a problem. And I think there's a reason for that. I think that what is actually happening right now is that our society is, again, I believe people are hacking that cognition. And because of that, I mean, I bring up Edward Bernays a lot. Um, I He's actually somebody I consider kind of a hero of mine, not a villain like most people consider him. Because he published, and I highly recommend anybody read his book Propaganda. It's as useful today as it was 100 years ago. Um,
I may do that. I've been looking for my next book. That might be my next book.
it's a pretty short book. You can read it pretty quickly, and it's no longer under copyright. I believe it's in the public domain now. So there's like YouTube audiobooks of it, um, and it's pretty simple reading. But he exposed how, um, well, he didn't term it outsourced cognition, but he did expose how our views of things are influenced, and Rene Girard, kind of his idea of mimetics, M-I-M-E, not M-E-M-E, um, mimetics, where we mimic each other, right? um, that's a lot stronger, again, than I think most people are cognizant of. And if our society continues to become, there is a cost to that, the mistrust that is being caused in our society. There's a very large cost, actually, right? And people, it's we have this idea of permanence. We believe wealth exists and it's transferred. Very few people recognize that wealth is created, destroyed, and consumed in addition to being transferred, right? And the idea that you have to, for example, have a filtration system at your house in order to safely drink water, as opposed to being able to outsource that as a community to the your local utility, right? That has a cost. That is actually taking wealth, right, and putting it somewhere it is less efficient at. And economics, this is what too many people simply do not have, have not studied enough economics to recognize, any wealth that's expended for the wrong thing could has opportunity costs, right? I think I told you, there are several things that I believe we could easily do, which would make our economy much more efficient, and that would reduce the destruction of wealth in our society by billions of dollars. And billions of dollars of wealth can do incredible good for people, right? And we produce so much great wealth, which is awesome. I love it. But when I see the destruction of wealth, it's heartbreaking, because there's a lot of people who could use that wealth, and we are not properly allocating our wealth in the most efficient ways, partially because special interests, I believe, have, this is my little shibboleth. Um,
Will
should
you explain what that means?
Oh, sure. Shibboleth comes from, there's this story in the Bible. There was a war between the tribes of Israel, and they had decided, I believe the tribe of Benjamin was, there was a war with them. So in order to figure out um, who was from the tribe of Benjamin, they would have them say the word shibboleth. And different people said that word differently, right? Depending on which tribe they were from. And that's how they would know who's from which tribe, right? And that's become kind of a marker of trying to figure out who is coming from which side. My shibboleth has become this question of, should the government pay $1 billion to save a baby's life? And if you have any hesitation in saying no, then you're not an adult, because that $1 billion, there are a lot of people who are literally dying, right? It's not one person living to be 100. It's not one baby living to be 100. That $1 billion could um, could buy far more quality adjusted life years, right? And there is this measure of dollars per quality adjusted life years, which a lot of people chafe at. They don't want to talk about this measure, right, of dollars per quality adjusted life year. You know what? I think $1 million per quality adjusted life year is way too much. And the way you know that is because um, we are not willing to spend $1 million to keep most people alive for 1 year. But when you actually do the calculation, right, and the policy analysis, which you should do in order to decide how we are going to use public funds, and I'm not talking about an individual with their own funds, with their own family, that's, I believe, a red herring people bring up. When we're talking about um, public policy, the only reasonable um, the only reasonable measure is to actually look at dollars per quality adjusted life year. But our public discourse, it's actually illegal, supposedly, for our healthcare system to use dollars per quality adjusted life year. Of course, it's not true that we don't use it. We do use it because you have to use it. But because somebody put this into a law, it's we pretend that we don't. We have a culture where we are not able to have adult conversations. That is very destructive. And it allows people who are dishonest to game the system, and that's why I believe it happens, is because there are people who are gaming the system. And it's, you know if we don't get ahead of this, we are going to see more and more of our society becoming more distrustful. We're going to be more inefficient, and the quality of life for us, for everyone, is going to suffer because of that. Um, a few people will be happier because they will be able to game this system, but there's going to be a lot more people who are going to suffer because of that.
I think that, I mean, I'm following the. I have a bunch of thoughts that come up, but to bring this back to like that level of analysis of um, what we're trying to do with a project is like, do you think that the the project that does this distributed cognition, is it supposed to also help decide public policy and government? Like because that's what you're kind of talking about, right?
Well, I mean, that's part of it. I think just being able to create a protocol of trust that it shouldn't matter what the knowledge is that you are trusting someone else with. Um, if if the protocol is actually capable of being secure, so that I know that, for example, let's go back to the cancer, right? Family member with cancer and cannabis, right? If I know that the information that you give me is going to be at least as good as the information that I could get myself, that level of trust is going to be incredibly useful, right? Um, and I do think if we are able to create such a protocol between the two of us, hopefully it will be something that can iterate, right? Um, and if it is, repeatable, that protocol, I think it can counteract this mistrust and that we have, and it shouldn't really matter what the precise information is that's being transmitted, right? If whatever I ask you, whatever I decide to outsource my cognition, right? Say, okay, Gavin knows more about X, Y, or Z. If I can trust you to actually be doing all the things that I would be doing myself, then um, that information is incredibly valuable.
So the thing I think that's missing in this, in the system we have today for education, um, and cognitive outsourcing, is there seems to be this. The thing that's missing is having people who have disagreements confront each other in a long form conversation. So I don't necessarily, if I'm not an expert on many things. I don't know. There's very few things I'm an expert at, but I would love to see three or four. I would love to see experts that have three or four differing ideas have conversations together over long periods of time. So I use, as a software engineer, I use this website called stackoverflow.com. That it's also like a child site on stackexchange.com. And you're allowed to ask a question, and then the community can provide answers, and you can have upvotes and downvotes for questions and answers, and you can have responses to questions and answers that can also be upvoted and downvoted, and it's really useful. I think there's probably a lot of jokes about Stack Overflow being used by software engineers who basically they don't know how to do something and they go look it up on Stack Overflow, and then someone solved the problem for them. Um, and then I could go into examples on why it's useful to have like more than one answer, because sometimes the first answer, like I have one where my highest rated answer is the second place answer. It's actually the best answer, but the number one answer has twice as many votes, and it's because it was like a first person to provide the answer had an advantage. A lot of people see the first answer and they try that and it works, but then they have the security problem. um, and if they had scrolled down, um, they would have noticed that a better way to do it. So I'm actually a fan of. I think what's missing is that there's the people who have disagreements aren't having conversations, and that's kind of what I look for. I've kind of pointed this pattern out, um, in criticizing everyone, right? And ultimately, I'd try to point the finger back at myself and say, am I willing to um, have conversations with people who disagree with me? Um, because I think that's what's missing. Um, yeah, I
So,
mean, so go ahead.
so dialogue is definitely a very important part of, and John Vervaeke actually calls it opponent processing, right? When you have that adversarial system, there are many ways of checking things. And one of the, there's a reason why our court system, for example, has that adversarial system. There, there are many ways of um, improving the knowledge that we have. Part of it is being able to reference the knowledge that's been produced and created and put into a repository like Wikipedia or Stack Overflow or whatever it is, or just Googling it, right? Um, and definitely this idea of a second opinion, right? Being able to, because I mean, this is a sort of um, double checking, and you know, part of what I want to um, make sure I point out to everyone is we we have started thinking about all of these things in terms of technology, but it's a lot older, right? This idea of human beings outsourcing cognition to each other, right? Going to a wise person, going to several wise people, having counselors, right? This These protocols already existed for a very long time. The, there have been very important changes in um, in how we've done this, especially over the past 50, 60 years. But a lot of the things that you're talking about, for example, you know, looking further, right? Having someone actually look through, you know, it the best case scenario is that people would look systematically throughout all of the answers, right? Search out the good answers, search out the various possibilities, and winnow out the spam, and you know, so processing information is something that we've actually, as human beings, we've improved this process over thousands of years, right? Library science existed before the computer. Um, the, the idea of having courts to establish truth, juries, experts, having various experts, having a having this adversarial system, all of these things, having professors, we've had these in our society. Unfortunately, on the internet, it seems like a lot of people are invested in pretending that we don't have a lot more experience with this type of thing than we do, in order, I believe, to allow them to continue to hack the system, right? There, there is no reason why we cannot have um, improved repositories of information, um, like Wikipedia, Stack Overflow, whatever it is. But as anybody who's been paying attention to your Google searches I mean, I certainly no longer trust Google searches. I used to be able to search up things that I knew where they were, right? I have started keeping bookmarks. Why? Because I can no longer rely on Google to give me the thing that I'm searching for. I stopped using bookmarks years ago.
Yeah, I noticed that I would do searches on Google, and I would compare. I actually have some videos on my channel of comparing my searches on Google with searches on. I think Ecosia is what I use. They plant trees, um, and you can definitely see. You can see a difference in the results that are returned. Um, there's a bias. There's an agenda. Um, so yeah, I get there's a there. I guess so. One thought I had is that I hear you saying that the protocols for what you're interested in doing have been done for a long time, but at the same time, there's been a lot of mistakes that have made throughout history as well, where the protocols failed, and I think you could find that everywhere. Um, so
We're
uh,
human.
yeah, yeah. So um, that lends toward my lack of trust to a degree. Like I actually have a lack of trust in even the modern justice systems. I have ideas for new justice systems that are based in claims of injury instead of prohibitions, where you have law enforcers who are enforcing laws that prohibit behaviors that where good people might be doing behaviors that are prohibited, but then they end up facing law enforcers in a justice system that um, is going to persecute them. So, an alternative, for example, justice system would be one that is based on claims of injury. Um, I think in modern law it would be called tort. So it'd be something like tort. Um, and I've only done 20 to 30 hours of research around law and thinking about law, but it seems like a it seems like a goal we would want to move toward, and obviously you wouldn't want to make a drastic step to that end goal, but you'd want to move toward it slowly. And so you would, as your justice system improves, you would want to see these prohibitions of behavior um, disappearing over time. So
Well, I mean, what you're saying is really important because um, we do see faults that I think generally all people, you talk to people and everybody agrees with it, right? So it's not something controversial. Um, but the problem is that we don't trust our jurists as much as we used to because and I think that there is a reason for that because our jurists are being dishonest. um, and you should hopefully be able to trust somebody who's been through 3 years of law school, has experience in the legal system, to have actually considered all of the things that you could possibly consider in you know spending 20, 30, even spending a year or two, right? You would hopefully, the people that we entrust to actually know what to do, right? um the the problem is that we cannot have that trust. We do not have that ability to look at somebody. I mean, there is no reason why I should feel that if I spend 20 hours looking into computer programming, I'm going to be able to do something as well or better as you who have spent years doing it, right? If I am able to do that, that speaks to your incompetence, right? And I
right,
think that is the problem.
I
Our
guess
our our jurists are actually that incompetent.
I, I actually, and I have to be careful when I judge, but there are fields there are career paths that I don't that I intentionally rejected. Um, so that's one part of it. Like going into engineering is very different. I would imagine very different than going into law school. I would also say like building houses and doing plumbing and electrical work is very different than going into law school. I don't know if, for example, when you study law, if there's anything like objective truth, like with plumbing, they say, well, I could say use the curse words, but uh, basically
Well,
it don't flow uphill and
yeah.
and hit lefty loosey righty tighty. There's a basically it's going to work or it doesn't work in a lot of these fields of study and career paths where and there's some fields where you don't have that kind of ability to really understand who is an expert.
See, that's yeah. In yes and no. I mean, this is one of the arguments I've actually had with Eric Weinstein, um, is that unfortunately, especially people who are from more of the hard sciences or from more of a technical or actual physical work, um, they often um, it's it is argued that there are no right answers and wrong answers in law. I believe that is demonstrably false. If it was that way, then there would be no use in having a legal system, especially a legal system that's as expensive as ours is, right? And our legal system is incredibly expensive, right? Our brightest minds go into law, become judges, right? Um, and the, the people who are earning vast sums, right, are the greatest lawyers in the United States. If we are distributing value that wrongly, right? If we are giving our brightest minds to a system that doesn't have objectively right answers, doesn't have better, better and worse performance, we are squandering huge amounts of our resources. And I
I
believe
think
that's
that's
absolutely inexcusable.
I think it's what's happening. So like I can see that I received a book from an uncle called Indian Wars, and I only read the first chapter, but the first chapter had basically it made the point that um, when whenever a European colonist um, um, mistreated, harmed, murdered someone from a tribe, the tribe would um, exact revenge. So but there was no justice system, and so it really kind of enlightened me. It opened my eyes to the fact that you need a justice system. You need a system by which people seek justice. So a justice system is good, and it's needed, and ideally it would improve over time. But just because it was good and needed doesn't mean that it has improved over time. It could have been corrupted and co-opted. And what I've seen as a pattern, and this is where we may disagree, I've seen I've seen a pattern, I should say, I've said something like this in the past, that if you, it's hard to, it's hard to do good work and make money. And what I've meant, but what I was thinking about when I said that was I was thinking about teachers. I was thinking about, like how much money can you make trying to raise children, like being a good parent. Um, there's these areas of interest that are good for humanity that is hard to uh, it's hard for that to be profitable. And so whenever whenever there's people making lots of profit in these areas like a justice system or a system that's supposed to provide food, um, education, some of these kind of basic needs, um, you'll probably find that there's, the incentives aren't right. The-
You are 100% right. There definitely is a problem. The problem is that the field of economics has been thoroughly corrupted. So economics is the study of the allocation of scarce resources. Okay. And what is the right answer in economics is which allocation is the most efficient. Now, that gets into a lot of philosophical points, right? And it's not a study which is devoid of value judgments. You most certainly do have to make value judgments, and there are presuppositions. But the problem is that our study of economics has been thoroughly corrupted. And I do mean thoroughly corrupted. Paul Krugman, who is a Nobel Prize winning economist, he won the Nobel Prize. Well, it's a Nobel Memorial Prize. It wasn't an actual Nobel Prize, but uh, that's a nitpicking. He's a
I don't
Nobel,
I don't
yeah,
know if winning a Nobel Prize is good or bad. So, but it's noted.
right. So the but he, as a columnist for the New York Times, says things which we know are lies. He they are in fact the opposite of what he won his Nobel Prize for, and there are things which go against what are clear truths for anybody who has studied economics. There is no accountability for him, right? So you are absolutely correct when you look at the system and say, look, I I don't see that people who are being rewarded based on the value that they create. Unfortunately, that is caused by this corruption that we do have. And in an efficiently functioning economy, and I'm not going to get into the various schools of economics, this is an important study, that a discipline where there are right and wrong answers. Unfortunately, part of the problem is that people like you, who are obviously very smart, um, look at this discipline and say, I don't see that there are people who have the right answers. And we don't. A lot of the information we have about economics is complete bunk. Our economists should be willing to tell us certain truths which they are not willing to say. And this is part of actually Eric Weinstein's whole thing. Is his wife is an economist. He attempted to tell truths with her, and he was shut down. But part of the problem is that a lot of people think that there are no correct answers in things like law and economics, where there definitely are, um, to the extent where there are right answers in plumbing, where some plumbers make so you don't have feces floating all over the place. Some plumbers make have leaks. A similar thing does happen in law. It does happen in economics. And what is even more tragic is that when we have our Supreme Court justices, right? Those 9 people who are making decisions for law for the entirety of humanity, right? Basically, if not just the United States, I mean, they do affect the whole world, but let's say just the United States, right? That one person needs to be somebody that you can trust, actually has studied the law enough to get to the correct answer. And unfortunately, increasingly in our society, we have people who are like, these people have no idea what they're talking about. And they're right, not because the people actually don't know what they're talking about, but because our system has been corrupted. I mean, I could talk about all kinds of things about how the legal system has been corrupted, how the discipline of economics has been corrupted. But it is really important that these things have been corrupted and that we as a society try to get back to where they are actually functioning.
This is where my technical mind. This is how my technical mind approaches it. It's a I go libertarian, um, because if you want to know the truth, you need to run experiments and you need to collect evidence. And whenever you have large, um, judicial systems and large economies, um, so you have rules that are forcing and coercing everyone within the United States, for example, to follow to preventing the states from running their own experiments, for example. Then it's harder to recognize the truth because it's harder to run those experiments. So I tend to I tend to lean libertarian just as a protocol. If you're talking about process and protocol, for the sake of being able to identify what is true with regard to justice systems and economics.
So what you are actually describing is something that is well known within both organizational behavior, within risk management, within economics, and um, so the actual um, idea you're mentioning is called subsidiarity. It's a concept that comes to us actually from the Catholic Church. It's been around for hundreds of years. It's something that we know is true, definitely, that uh, when you have one system, right, for large numbers of things, it is going to be less responsive, less efficient. There are, so this is something that has been actually studied, and you are 100% correct. You are, in fact, reinventing the wheel, which is what I find unconscionable. What you just said should be something that is known and agreed to universally because the experimental data is in, the historical data is in. Um, there, there is a body of knowledge so that what you just said, so this idea that subsidiarity actually works well is should not be controversial at all. Should not be something that you would consider an opinion. It should be something that we universally acknowledge
The,
actually improves the situation.
yeah, I just wanted to mention three things. So um, Eric Weinstein had mentioned, when he talks about libertarians. I know he references an author who tries to summarize libertarians, liberals, and conservatives. I think the sentence says libertarians don't like being coerced, but that's not. I don't like being coerced, but uh, this part of libertarianism where you have decentralization, subsidiary. How do you say that?
Subsidiarity, yes, it's a hard word.
Subsidiarity. Um, yeah, I've just always called it decentralization. Um, that's the reason. That's like would be my favorite reason for libertarianism. Um, no, I wonder if I lost all my other thoughts. um, okay, I'll remember them in a minute. But
Right.
yeah,
No, I mean, I just think it's so important that somebody like you would be able to look towards somebody who has studied um, government and economics, and be able to say something like that, and that person would actually affirm the things that you see clearly, and be willing to say, oh, you know what you are describing, it's variously also referred to in federalism is slightly different. Like, this is something that is important enough that we have seriously dug into it as a society, right? This has been studied very much. Unfortunately, um, it's not a place where you can be sure that if you brought up the same ideas to somebody like Paul Krugman, who obviously knows what you said is true, or Robert Reich, or I could name many people who know that what you are saying is true, that there is an efficiency and a resilience in having decentralization, having subsidiarity, having federalism. ha- um, in risk management, we call it segregation and duplication. What you are saying is so true that any expert should be willing to acknowledge that.
so
Unfortunately, that's not what happens.
so the reason I came across this idea is just because of my experience in software engineering and software architecture. So what's interesting is that these patterns can be realized in architecture. That's right. And probably architecture, anytime you're trying to solve any real problems at scale, you start coming across these patterns. And then one thing I was going to mention is tried to share an idea with Noam Chomsky like over a decade ago about this idea, and he had, I think he had a valid criticism of decentralization. It was that um, it was the criticism was that superpowers can use this divide and conquer technique in order to um, basically threaten the country. So there is a risk whenever you're dealing with like superpowers, I think, and I think you can basically acknowledge and recognize that risk, and that's where you would want to be able to do something like a confederation so that um, entities can come together rapidly. And the idea, if you have decentralization, ideally would be that you would be able to assemble rapidly, more rapidly than a superpower. So, but I do think that's something you have to be careful about as being divided and conquered.
That's, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Noam Chomsky, for being a very, very intelligent person, is also remarkably dishonest, um, which which is sad. I it's very, very sad, especially because I think for a lot of people he has provided a lot of value. I think it's a problem. You're um, obviously this idea that there can be a gaming system of decentralization. That's why subsidiarity is a particular manner of doing it, which uh, I mean, the hierarchy in the Catholic Church, obviously there's one person at the top, and this concept of subsidiarity has allowed the Catholic Church to have 1 billion members, right? So this is an organization it is the most successful organization of human beings in human history, right? A billion people who essentially have one, elected king. That's remarkable, right? Um, and
But
obviously, I
I don't
mean,
know if the king is that great or not, but
well, I mean, we've definitely seen the problems that their hierarchy can have, and human
uh,
beings
I guess
obviously
my
can be corrupt,
my
right?
criticism would just be that I think with that much influence and power, I would have ended world hunger. So, but
Um,
I don't know.
I honestly that's not one of my criticisms, because the Catholic Church um, does remarkable amounts of good in both providing healthcare, schooling, and food throughout the
I
world. Yeah.
I think that there's something I've mentioned it as something related to goals. I've had this idea a few times now. Like, so they have different goals. Their goals have something to do with an afterlife. And whenever your goals are when the pinnacle of your goals have something to do with an afterlife, um, then you might miss out on. You might not be able to see the opportunities where you could try to, for example, create heaven on earth. So
Well,
like,
okay. I mean,
but I would just I'm going to continue with this goals idea that, so you also said Noam Chomsky's dishonest. And it reminded me of a post I did I wrote a post about Facebook had well, actually my wife found out that this post from this guy named Chris Beat Cancer, it got labeled as fake news. Facebook linked an article. When I read it, I could see where that article itself could be thought of as fake news. And the realization is related to, I read the book The Goal by Ellie Goldratt. And the realization is that sometimes people perceive dishonesty simply because there's a difference of agenda and goals. So it's strange, but basically you assess the information of what and the claims of whether or not they're true or false based on your goals and your worldview. And so when people have these different goals and worldviews, they will actually perceive the other people as being dishonest.
so we're getting into very deep questions of both epistemology, theology. I shouldn't have said both because it also includes psychology, other fields of philosophy. And really, we've started grappling with those things which are really essential. And um, I mean, I don't want to kind of um, regurgitate a lot of information, um, because obviously, I mean, the what you're touching upon is really broad. What I will say is that when I say someone is dishonest, um, my standard for that is that that person knows that the information that they are giving is misleading, and they are deliberately giving that misleading information. Now, whether my assessment as to Noam Chomsky is biased or not, you know, we can get into that. But yeah, I mean, my definition of dishonest is that somebody is deliberately misleading people, and I believe Noam Chomsky very deliberately misleads people.
I can understand that. I think that I do think there is bias. Like, I think we all have bias, and I think um, it's easy to perceive the other person as being misleading, as like intentionally being misleading, when in fact they are accidentally being misleading. It's knowing their intention is the hard part.
It is, and that's kind of why I said to you previously that Hanlon's razor, this idea that you should never attribute to malice what could be negligence, I believe is actually malware. Um, it is an assumption that makes it very easy for psychopaths to get away with their malicious actions because the fact is that we do have um, a lot of people who have malicious intent. And if you presume that they don't, I mean, in a court of law, yes, we presume that they don't. And that makes sense for a court of law. Unfortunately, in most positions of authority, where someone is having large amounts of cognition being outsourced to them, very important cognition by society, if they are a public intellectual, um, negligence and malice have very similar effects. And we actually talked about this earlier. If somebody fails to give good models, good predictions of what's going to happen, that is one way of keeping them accountable, right? And I, yes, it's really, really hard to show that somebody has malintent. It's so important that I think, especially for somebody in a place of authority, you should presume malintent, unfortunately, and definitely if you have negligence, it doesn't even matter whether they were negligent or they were incompetent or they were malicious. That person is failing in a very important place. So your plumber might want to do a good job.
Yeah, I've actually I've argued that, um, or I've tried to argue that, and I've thought about the idea that intent doesn't matter. And also, I would say that you could still remain agnostic, especially if you don't care whether it was intentional or not, right? Um, so yeah, there's a principle of charity and giving people the benefit of the doubt and Hanlon's razor. You can you could just be agnostic about it and say, I don't know. And then as a strategy or a protocol, you might try to present those people with opportunities to, you would essentially like test them without them knowing they're being tested to see how they um, how they perform in the experiment, to see whether they are malicious or not. So
Right. And I think, I mean, that's one of the things that I've arrived at is that we do have to, um, we talked about using the Git platform, which uses version control, right? Um, and I think in order to do high fidelity cognitive outsourcing, you are going to have a sort of um, credit system for the individual, which isn't which does not separate the person from the thought, right? And that's problematic, obviously, because in an optimal situation, you would be able to evaluate each thought, right? Each datum without regard to the person who, the genetic fallacy is a logical fallacy. The problem, you know the problem is that we are dealing with such large amounts of information that we have no choice but to start to use heuristics which have which are not foolproof. We cannot rely on strict logical, it's just infeasible. Just like, um, you cannot check every bit of food you eat for poison. You just can't, right? Um, and so we are going to have to use heuristics, and I think, eh, unfortunately, too many people have been convinced that we can live by uh, this. I mean, sometimes people refer to it as scientism, this rationalism, which is actually quite utopian and unrealistic and um, self-delusional, I would say.
Yeah, um, I guess I'm wondering where I want this to go. This conversation is so you're talking about Git, you're talking about credits. One of the ideas that I've had, and I've been creating videos. Most of them are private for a decade. I've been posting ideas and thoughts. Some of those posts have gotten lost, and the idea that I've had is that I've had a lot of ideas around it. One of the ideas is that I'll do the wildest idea. The wildest idea is that we would somehow there would emerge like an artificial intelligence that would be the most have access to the most amount of information and be able to process more information. I mean, I come across this idea from a background in missile defense where they were shooting down a missile with a missile, where you have computers that are able to do things that humans can't do. So the idea would be that if I'm recording this data, um, that there would eventually be an artificial intelligence, and my hope would be that the artificial intelligence, the thing that the artificial intelligence needs to be able to do is to identify people, the humans, and their strengths and weaknesses, and help organize them such that you can solve big problems. And so I've been putting my work and saving my work in the digital space on the internet and databases with the hope that one day all of that information would help an artificial intelligence decide what to do with me. um, Another way to look at it is that if I chose to run for office one day, wanted to get into politics, you should be able to go back and look at you should be able to look at my thoughts. I would trust artificial intelligence better than humans, but you should be able to see the mistakes I made and the changes in my thinking, and it would kind of be a proof of it would be the credits that would indicate what kind of person I am. Um, so in general, I like that idea. I, I I like that idea of trying to um, develop your thoughts, share your thoughts, and do that throughout life. It's like a journal that would be accessible um, to some future artificial intelligence, for example. And that's kind of how I've approached it up until this point. I don't know.
It's so funny. I find that we have very, very similar thought patterns. I'm so glad that Sally Joe introduced us. So I'm a bit older than you are, and when I was in college, that's when the internet was really getting going. And at the time, we actually thought the internet was forever, and unfortunately it no longer is. But at the time, I just assumed that any web page I made would be infinitely available on um, through various search engines. um, and I did very much, just put my ideas out there, so that it would be there. And I did in fact think that eventually, at the time, spider crawling web pages was kind of like, you know, we were very much thinking that one day this would be, the internet would be the repository of human knowledge. And we were getting to a point where the best ideas would float to the top. And unfortunately, that that has not even come close to happening. Um, but it was a very real, um, it was more of a realistic uh, hope when I was an undergrad, and you were probably still in elementary school than it is now. And I think part of that is because of the corruption. I think there are people who do not want that sort of transparency and that sort of accountability. And they've, yeah.
So one, let's see, the software that I work on in my day job is it's used by companies to monitor their reputation online. They can do things like hook into Twitter and all these other platforms, and they call it listening. So they can listen for certain keywords and phrases. Um, there is, you can, let's see, yeah, there's other things it does, but the things I'm interested in is like that listening aspect. So you can connect to multiple platforms and you can listen across multiple platforms. And then another thing that I've worked on is um, I've done a little bit of machine learning work, um, and I like this idea that you could create personality profiles. You could create these machine learning models that represent a personality profile, um, and so what there's an opportunity for anyone to use this kind of tool or technology, to basically solve this problem of this human resources problem, this HR problem of trying to recruit people into the group. Um, you had said that we've been doing this librarian kind of activity for a long time, but I don't think we've been doing this kind of like secretary slash HR activity. I think we've done it, but I don't think we are like great at it. And so I like to think that these platforms and the internet and there's these interfaces that we can have access to. I'd like to think they could be used to solve this problem of identifying people who share a common goal. Because you were saying earlier that there's there's so much wealth that's being destroyed, and I was just having this kind of discussion with a coworker today, maybe it was yesterday, that even if like he was saying the problem has something to do with wealth distribution, and my thinking is that even if you took all of this excess wealth and you're able to direct it toward the people who are stuck at the bottom, um, I don't think we're good at organizing and create and then transforming, using that wealth to organize people in order to sustainably solve the problem. And so my thinking is that if you had the mission and the mission statement, if you had the rules in place for the organization, and if you had identified people who had agreed with these rules and the mission statement. These are things that would be different than the social contract. Like they would be kind of unique. And if you had enough people who agreed to them, ideally you would be using this technology to really um, see, who these people are if they were doing things like I've been doing. Um, then I think you could go and seek the money. And I think there would be a lot of people who'd be willing to donate money in order to solve some big problems. I think that can happen. That might be me being naive, but I imagine that there's not a lot of faith or trust in any institutions or organizations or nonprofits to actually solve these big problems.
Unfortunately, it's the situation is even worse than you think. I don't think you're naive. Um, what you are describing, like I said, when I was an undergrad, um, was actually something that I thought was a lot more feasible than I do now, because technology certainly has allows for many things which we are not utilizing it for. That is 100% true. The internet has created avenues that, um, while they've certainly been very beneficial to human beings, have not been optimally efficient. Um, and unfortunately, I would say that that isn't just because nobody has tried it. In fact, I think many people have tried. There is, there are special interests who are defending themselves against, um, that more efficient allocation of resources, because an inefficient allocation of resources does benefit some people disproportionately. And so it's a lot worse than you
It,
think.
it sounds like you would expect that this kind of like project I'm imagining, which I think has overlap with the project that you're imagining, um, you're expecting that it would encounter resistance. Um, but I would say that I have more hope. I would have more hope now, even acknowledging that there is resistance. I would have more hope now because I think there's been resistance for a long time, even back when you had hope. Um, but the tech, like there's literally technology that's coming out like last month and every day, especially around machine learning, that allows us to do things that we couldn't have done back when you had hope. So like, and another thing for hope, is you mentioned like, I think about Sally Joe, I think about, Griswold Groom. Um, you and I are here talking to each other. Um, we, if we were the same age, but it was 20 years ago, we might not have found each other. We definitely wouldn't be having this kind of a Zoom chat thing that we're doing now. So there's been this like ecosystem of technologies that has allowed for some things to happen that couldn't have happened before. So yes, there may be resistance. Um, I like to think that the this is another part where I might be naive. I like to think that, the organization could be, um, structured in such a way that, especially when you appreciate like decentralization, organization could be structured in such a way that the timing of how you, grow, and the operations that you do, they would um, they would be well thought out, um, and the structure itself would be well thought out so that it's not vulnerable. So, I,
Well, I certainly don't want to blackpill you. I don't.
you can't. So
I definitely, I do want to hold out hope, and you are 100% correct in saying that, technology has offered us many things, and this is kind of Steven Pinker's whole thing of enlightenment now. People just do not appreciate how good we have it. Unfortunately, I think a large part of the problem is that, in the way that our cognition, our social cognition, our distributed cognition has been hacked. We are there are dangers which I unfortunately think Steven Pinker is not seeing. Nassim Taleb has been particularly good in describing them. Several other people, I believe, have also been talking about them. Um, Unfortunately, you know, things are very good right now. That's good. Unfortunately, I do not feel that right now the way we are headed is in a positive direction. And Jonathan Haidt has a similar view. I think lots of people who I do trust as really understanding what's going on, there are really serious problems. And the reason why I think the developing a protocol where we can trust our cognition to each other more explicitly, transparently, and securely. Uh, I just think that is absolutely essential to being able to get out of this situation we find ourselves in, which unfortunately, I mean, 2020 was a hell of a year. And I think 2021 is not going to be much better. And I'm not hopeful that 2022 will be either.
Yeah, the one I've also thought that the darkness is an opportunity for light. Like I feel like light has a advantage. Um, so you can so when things are getting dark, like 2020, you say, yeah, 2021. There's a part of me that gets excited about it because I think it can, if it doesn't get too bad, it can be just what's needed in order to push us, encourage us to like really ask ourselves, what can I be doing different in order to try to make this world a better place. Um, I can't imagine things getting very bad. Like when I think about kind of worst case scenarios, uh, I imagine some solar flare knocking out all the electrical grid or something like that. But um, that would be completely that would be on orders of magnitude worse than what we've experienced in 2020. So 2020 for me, it's um, to me it looks like an attempt at, I'm a libertarian. It looks to me like an attempt at controlling people. And people, I saw it also with 9/11. People are controlled by their fears. And I did experience a little bit of the fear. Um, and after some time and some observation and looking at data, it doesn't, it's not as scary now. But you can always be scared about a future that doesn't exist, and that's what a lot of people are scared of. But
Well, my
yeah,
my job,
it's an opportunity for. I still think that it can be an opportunity for people to actually step up.
yeah, I mean, my job as a risk manager, I work in quantifying risk. And very similarly, I think we are not quantifying the risks regarding COVID in the manner that we should. Again, we should be looking at dollars per quality adjusted life year, which we explicitly are not. There are economists, Glenn Lowry, I would highly recommend, has discussed that in regards with COVID. But I that is actually part of what makes me pessimistic, is that our society is not quantifying risk as rationally as I think we would have even 5, 8, 10 years ago.
You also live in California. Um, so I live in Alabama, two very different places. As far as like when you say, well, what are people thinking and believing? From my perspective, over half of the people think that the authorities are full of it. Like over half of the people, and they are correct to some degree, but they're also making a lot of mistakes too. So I'm having conversations. I got to have conversations with my in-laws, um, and I'm able to. They will run some news by me, and I try to analyze that news in a way that's like neutral, right? It's like, well, there's some words here that are just meant to appeal to conservatives. To I forget. I think the news was that CNN had someone on their payroll paying them $70,000 a year to that was part of Antifa and was filming Antifa, and I'm like, well, what is Antifa? Are you going to stereotype everyone who is part of Antifa? And so we go and we try to look up, well, what is Antifa? How long has it been around? You know, is this person actually destroying property, or do they believe that Donald Trump is Hitler, and that and that and that and that we need to make sure that he doesn't get elected, which would explain why there's people who are doing things in the election system. So you know I'm just trying to, yeah, I'm seeing there's a lot of people who don't trust any of it, but they are also making mistakes with their cognitive outsourcing as well. It's happening on both sides.
The most unfortunate thing, if we could reliably say that these sense-making mechanisms are wrong, then we would at least be gaining some information. Unfortunately,
I mean, I've been in that state of mind for years now. So that these sense making or the sense making institutions are wrong. Like, so.
well, I mean, I wish they were even reliably wrong. Unfortunately, I'm scared that they're not even reliably wrong, which makes them even less, a stopped clock is wrong, is right 2 times a day. A clock that's wildly moving in various ways may be right, may be wrong at any time. You just can't rely on it whatsoever.
Well, the thing is so it goes back to the agendas and the goals, and the question is, well, what are they? So they have an agenda, and you can see it based on there's a selection bias. So what are they selecting to put out there for people's attention, and what are they ignoring? And from what I can tell, they aren't interested in and you know they're not interested in this idea that I have a peace on earth. They're not interested in the best, trying to create the best for humanity. So they're interested in something like power, personal profit, trying to. Maybe they're just trying to pay their bills, but it's not humanity as a whole.
Uh,
It's self-centered to some degree. That they're not concerned about the long-term um, uh, sustainable future of humanity.
Unfortunately, I have to say it's a little bit worse than being able to see their bias. I think Eric is correct when he says that there's an element of kayfabe, right? Where they are actually putting on a show, and behind the show, there is another level of deception going on. Um, and unfortunately, I think it's there is that second level, that second tier of deception behind that, um, which is masking things which are even worse than what you're seeing. Um,
Yeah.
the first level is Fox versus CNN, and Fox has these values and CNN has these values. Unfortunately, Fox and CNN are playing a game with each other.
So there's two solutions that I've thought of. Um, one of them, one of them before the elections. One of them had to do with supporting the MORE Act, and basically the MORE Act. It went through Congress. The Senate will probably say no to it, but it will remove cannabis from Controlled Substances Act list. It will no longer be a Schedule One substance. This would be something that would be in the interest of like all of these different people who are um, against each other. So you have like Black Lives Matter, you have Antifa, you have Proud Boys, you can have all kinds of people on different sides who would be for this kind of solution, and it would actually have an impact. It would have a good impact in the lives of a lot of these people. But after the election, there's a solution that nobody's paying attention to, and it's election integrity. And so I've tried to get in touch with my congressman Mo Brooks, and I was told that he was going to schedule a call with me, and that was like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it hasn't happened. My goal would be to try and connect with, Donald Trump, and it's because at one point I was thinking, well, the system itself is not going to be able to help Donald Trump. Um, if I would say, I don't think it's just an if. I think the system is corrupted. It has been corrupted for years, and Donald Trump was um, a victim of the system to a degree. And then I would, but if he wanted to be a good leader, he would try his best to make sure that future elections there would be more integrity in future elections. And if he had tried, and also I have criticisms of his presidency as well related to the same topic, but I have no way of getting in touch with him. And there's actually an electionintegrity.org. I tried reaching out to them, and what I've found in general is that um, when I try to volunteer to help solve these problems, um, there's almost always nobody is interested in solving the problems. So, but it's so at the root of all this, like, what is it? It's like the question is, well, how many people actually care? Um, and so with that, and ultimately, we can only care about a certain amount of things. And what I see is that there's very few people who care about the big problems. And then the people who are complaining about the problems, they aren't interested in solving the problems either. So,
Well, I think it's kind of even worse than that. There are people who pose as people who would help fix the problems, who are there simply to um, absorb that energy towards the system being fixed. Um, uh, Honestly, I mean, the levels of dishonesty going on, and the resistance that you're seeing is it's a lot worse than I think you're there. It's not just that nobody wants to actually fix the problems you're seeing. There are people with a lot of money and power who are working to make sure that those solutions actually do not happen, and to keep you distracted. So, personally, I am for marijuana legalization, um, simply because I believe marijuana prohibition does not work. Marijuana is not as bad as alcohol, and alcohol is legal because alcohol prohibition did not work. Um, Unfortunately, things like trying to get an act by Congress to take marijuana off Schedule One is one of those distractions, because even if Congress were to do that, The United States is bound by international treaties which make marijuana illegal, and so we would have to renegotiate those treaties in order for that to happen. There are layers upon layers of things that are getting in the way of very solid policy prescriptions. I could name several of them, marijuana legalization being one of them. There are many, many others, which very, very smart people, John McWhorter, Jonathan Haidt, Bjorn Lomborg, I mean, you name it, there are many good ideas out there that are not being implemented deliberately because there are people who are manipulating our public policy discussion uh, because of their special interests. And as somebody who really has dug into this, I think more than most people, um, I've studied this on a level that a lot of people I don't think are, have even had access to. Um, there are a lot more bad actors out there keeping our collective collective sense making from crystallizing very good policy prescriptions. Um, there are a lot of bad actors out there that are stopping this, which is why I think we need to start by securing our our cognitive outsourcing, because that is the weakest point. That is
Yeah.
where the hacking is happening.
Yeah, so the I guess I try to point my finger back at myself and try to encourage people to do that. So I can see a world that you're talking about. With you keep saying it's worse than that, and I'm fine with that, except that, and I would say that, yeah, it's worse than that, and you're trying to do something, right? Um, so that's important, and I would say that's what's missing, right? It's um, the question is how many people are trying to do something about it. Like there are big problems, there are solutions, and uh, and for some reason, and the systems that would allow us to do this cognitive outsourcing or sense making don't work. Therefore, we have to somehow organize grassroots kinds of effort at forming our own networks, our own cognitive outsourcing networks. So, and that just it requires cooperation and participation. So, it's
You are 100% right, and this is why I agree with you so much. Um, I the thing is also, for example, when were you on Eric's Discord server, the Portal
I
Discord?
I was, but I ended up in the disk channel mostly, and just
Okay.
posting in the disk distributed disk suppression complex channel because that was kind of at the heart of like even when humans like to point the fingers at others and they never stop to say, well, what can I do? Um, there is a kind of disk, there is idea suppression going on even within each individual, and that's like us trying to encourage people to form networks, to take back our sense making. Um, I think that's part of the solution.
The problem with the Portal Discord server was that it was sabotaged. Actually, I mean, I've people deliberately worked to stop what was happening from being as successful as it was being, and that's that's a huge problem. I think first we have to be able to make a secure protocol, because I have been involved in several iterations of trying to do this um, in similar manners. and there is a level of attack possible, and people do actually attack at that level, which you know, you cannot.
Can you describe the attack?
Sure. So one particular person came into the community with several other people, uh, deliberately trying to sow discord, to split people apart, to cause people to get into fights, which caused the server to actually break into two. I mean, continually, this person and his cohorts have deliberately made it part of their mission to stop Eric, particularly, from being successful. I believe for ideological reasons. This person sincerely believes in critical race theory and is an ideologue in that, and has cohorts and has people helping him. So I know at least 3 people were involved in a coordinated attack where they would start discussions and just create enough noise to interrupt discussions that were being productive.
The idea I'd recommended was that um, there would be a channel that would um, it would be like a prison where you could put people, and then you would also put it in slow mode. So you would only be able to post once a day, and but you could remain on the server, but you could only post in one channel once a day. That was kind of my idea for how to handle people that you, as a moderator, see as a threat that are behaving in ways that you don't like. I don't
Well,
necessarily agree with banning people, but I feel like you can definitely restrict their activities. Um, it, it would be
but
nice if you could convert them.
oh, yes, but part of the problem is, once by the time you expend the resources to identify that person, the damage may be done. I mean, we know who that person is. I don't think that person is capable of himself doing that again. But first of all, the damage is done. Second, um, if you have an anonymous internet, which is part of the reason why I've started using my own name, doxing myself. My cell phone number is on the internet. It's freely available. I am who I am. Um, because I think we've gotten to a point where we need to uniquely identify human beings, um, part of that security system. But yeah, the protocol needs to be secured. That there's yeah.
Yeah. So, and I like that the there's another thing in Discord where you can require that people use a cell phone. They can't enter without a cell phone number. But I also, so yeah, you've noticed I share my real name. I've been doing it for a long time, um, but I've warned people to be careful about it because you may have done things in the past that you're not proud of, or um, you might end up, you might not be ready to say things publicly that you're willing, that you can stand behind and without fear. So, but I think that's a good filter, right? Ideally, if you're going to create a think tank or a network of people who are trying to do cognitive outsourcing, they need to be people who have enough confidence to to like the confidence might be that they are willing to admit when they make mistakes and learn. Like that's kind of my confidence is like, yeah, if I make mistakes, I'm willing to learn, um, and I'll stand behind that. I've made a lot of mistakes, um, but yeah, those are the. I think that's a good filter. Being willing to share your identity as part of a protocol of participating in the sense making network. Right?
See, yeah, I mean, I personally am not married. I have no kids. I work as an independent consultant. I have no boss. Nobody can fire me. So I am perfectly, I know that my risks are contained. I don't know if I would be um, willing. In fact, if I had kids, I certainly would not be willing to do similar things. Maybe depending on what my wife thought if I was married. Um, and certainly, I mean, you have to be in a position where you are not afraid of being fired. And unfortunately, the number of people who are in this secure of a position as I am is very small. Um, I would like to think that it's possible to do that, but I, I I don't think we can get enough people uh, for it to be a viable part of a iterable um, protocol.
The I I feel like there's millions of people who would be in. So obviously I have a wife and kids, but I try not to say controversial things. So when I say things that people may perceive to be controversial, it's usually just their interpretation of the things I said, and so it would only take a conversation. And so I'm not, you know, I also I have kind of a history with, the teachings of Don Juan, Carlos Castaneda, and I just now read the Four Agreements. There's so the Four Agreements is that, you know, be impeccable with your word. Agreement number one. Number two, don't take anything personally. Number three, don't make assumptions, and number four, try your best. And it's like if you do those four things, um, and you say you've practiced it for 10 years and then you start doing it, um, then you're pretty safe. If you, well, I know you almost have this, like there are real conspiracies, and I think you are, I get the sense that you're aware of them. um, and but I'm not going to live in fear. I'm going to try to be impeccable with my word. I'm not going to live in fear, and I'm going to be very careful about what I say. At least I'm going to try to be, and I will walk back things if I say things that are wrong, and I'm able to. So if I talk to this person who's a critical race theorist, I will listen to them as if they might have something to teach me. I'm probably going to have to do this uh, sensitivity training eventually. I'm going to do it with a mind of, well, maybe I'll have something to learn. Like I'm not going to go into it with any preconceived notions. Um, so I'm willing. It might be that like I'll approach it. I might become a postmodernist critical race theorist. Like I'm not against it. Just I'm agnostic about all this stuff. So I'm coming at it with love.
My
Uh,
my my concern, and it's a very real concern, is that no matter how careful you are with your words, that will not immunize you against somebody maliciously taking your words out of context or misquoting you. When somebody is actually trying to be malicious, they can use all kinds of things against you. And critical race theory actually presumes that you will be as nice as you are in giving them a chance to explain themselves in order to foil you. So they use that against you. And it's unfortunately, it's we are at a situation where if you approach um, if you approach critical race theorists in the manner you are trying to, you are guaranteeing failure for not only yourself, but everyone who's trying to also with you.
So the network of people, that I interact with, they don't have to. Uh, they shouldn't be the type of people who would disown you because of words that we're taking out of context. It's like that's a good filter. You don't want people in that network who would disown you for taking words out of context. And then to the critical race theorists, like I actually believe there may be merit to the ideas that they have, but they use words that I disagree with. So like, you know, systemic racism, like that word, using that word racism and the way they use it and the way I understand they use it, um, it doesn't it's not the same thing as like the image of, you know, um, a family of black people hanging from a tree, right? That were killed by people who don't like you because of your color of your skin. It's not the same thing, right? You can call it racism. They can call this one thing racism, and this other thing that we've all been taught is racism. Um, they can try to basically change the definition of a word so that they can get you to feel a certain way about something. That's just the technique they're using, where they're basic. They're casting a spell with the way that they are changing the definition of the word over time, so that we're taught racism is bad, and then they change the meaning of racism, and then they are able to create an enemy, and fear and hate. So, I mean, I understand the game, and I think they have valid points, but I disagree with the words they use.
Well,
So,
that's, I mean, it's they they are hiding behind a lot of, so there are several techniques such as the Modern Bailey technique. Um, there the level of gaming that is going on is, I mean, if we cannot think of create a protocol that is resistant, where we can trust, where you would be able to trust that, um, somebody else has in fact gone, waded in through what the real points within critical race theory are, and has garnered those and integrated those so that you can stop being, having your resources occupied by the critical race theorists. um, they will take you out through dishonest techniques, which will make you, in fact, waste your resources. And that is one of the ways in which they are making it impossible for us to make progress, is by actually deliberately wasting your attention, your time, your cognition as a resource.
right, I agree. I definitely, I think it's good to be careful about what you pay attention to, and it's good to remember essentially your hierarchy of values, right? And yeah, and so one technique. This is like an Elliot Temple thing, and I was actually trying to do it, but I think he does it better. Is like when you think about an idea, it's good to write it down so that anytime you ever encounter a critical race theorist, you can share a link to say, "Hey, this is my thoughts on the subject. And this is where I think that you're right, and this is where I think you're wrong, and this is where I think you're being misleading with the definitions of the words you're using." So you can actually adopt a strategy or a protocol such that they become, whoever they are, people who believe in a certain idea. They don't become a burden on your resources. You can also have your network be like, "Hey, have you seen this link?" I've seen Elliot Temple do that, and seen people that he's taught do that. It's like, have you read this link? And so, in that way, you can still have your filters, and you can treat your attention as being precious, but you're also not ignoring uh, people who think you're making mistakes. You can either intentionally say, I'm ignoring this because it doesn't register as being valuable, or you can say, I have paid attention to this, and this was the assessment I had. And he's got all kinds of things. It is about debate policy and stuff. I don't necessarily agree with everything. We actually got into a back and forth about his impasse policy, but yeah, I'd become irrational at one point, and I didn't read a link. So, but I think he has a lot of good ideas, and I think that, for example, writing your ideas out so that you can just share links with people is a way to avoid wasting resources, especially
Well,
with
that is a sort of cognitive outsourcing. He
right.
is, encapsulating his cognition in a, you know, um, uh, ultimately though, I think we do need to go back to a place where we can once again trust experts, so that when something like race relations comes up, you would be able to, instead of having your own policy, um, be able to simply say, well, what are the experts that I trust
Yeah,
saying about this?
yeah. They there was there was stuff at work around in the news, and then there's reactions in companies, and so I shared a link with my CEO to an article written by Coleman Hughes. And so what's brilliant about doing that is, like, Coleman Hughes has thought about these issues more than I have, and he actually he said things that I wasn't sure about, um, but I thought that he had thought about them a lot, and they were his ideas. They weren't my ideas. So I was able to share a link about a guy who has thought about these ideas and is willing to have conversations, and and so it allows me to avoid some of that risk. Right? It's not my ideas; it's someone else's ideas, and and it was I believe that is a way to do cognitive outsourcing. Right?
It is, yeah. Unfortunately, I do have to go.
Okay.
But one thing, that's why they're destroying Coleman Hughes, because he provides that. So, yeah, we will have to continue this later.
All right. Well, I enjoyed it. As soon as
Me
we
too.
started talking, I was no longer sleepy, so I
Glad
enjoyed
to
it.
hear it. It's amazing how alike we think in many ways.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and I look forward to trying to work with you.
Me too.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Bye bye.